All right, let's move on to 3F. I'm sure we've got a lot of work to do on 3F, I'm sure. All right, so 3F regarding war. An individual or a community may legitimately defend themselves and their property or that of others consensually on behalf using proportional responsive coercion against aggressors. This may include lethal coercion and enforcing restitution by aggressors to their victims. However, what is known as war, as conducted by states, is never moral or just. We condemn and reject war in the strongest terms as a great evil. Christians should never participate in a state's military that engages in any non-defensive actions and or coercive actions that are disproportionate and or actions that knowingly injure or murder any non-aggressors. Nor should Christians take employment with any contractors that supply such a state's military war making. Romans 12, verse 18, Proverbs 1, verses 10 through 16. All righty. Okay, so under this guideline, what wars were just and unjust from our perspective as Americans in the last 250 years, and what should have been done instead?
Yeah. Once again, in the references that we give for this subsection, there's some material there that suggests none as far as wars in American history. None were justified. I think that, the Declaration of Independence, in terms of a defensive war, obviously not every single act by every single person would have been justified or defensive or proportionate, etc. But if you're going to, your best shot at finding people acting in a just defense would be American independence. And outside of the American colonies and so on, there were, perhaps some other particular defensive acts that you could find, but on the whole, you're not going to find any. And the criteria, if you look a little bit closer at the way it's stated, when it says Christians should never participate in a state's military that engages in any non-defensive actions, so defense becomes, or can be seen as a criteria, must be responsive, right? So not initiatory, and then and or coercive actions that are disproportionate. So these responsive defensive actions have to be proportionate defense, and then and or actions that knowingly injure or murder any non-aggressors. So it has to be directed at the people who are actually perpetrating the aggression, initiating it. And so those three serve as the criteria. So in any cases where you find those criteria violated, there's a problem, and we can't justify aggressive action, or rather coercive action, that isn't proportionally responsive,
Right.
Coercion against aggressors. Anything that's not that, we can't justify even under someone else's authority or supposed authority.
All right, so December 7th, 1941, you're president of the United States, Pearl Harbor happens. What do you do?
Well, probably if what's known about it is true, or what people suppose is known about all that, it may have never happened, because it was something of a setup, perhaps. But let's suppose it was a surprise attack. I imagine that short of declaring war and dropping atomic bombs on civilians, there's probably proportionate, responsive actions that can be taken against those responsible for the aggression. But of course, the state is involved in taxation and the draft, conscription, basically involuntary servitude. So there's already problems with the initial setup. It's sort of like, what if the, one mafia executes a hit against another mafia? What should the
Okay.
the victim
So,
mafia do? And you're like, well, they're a mafia,
right.
so.
So let's think about it a different way then. So, let's say Europe in the 1930s has somehow between World War One and 1938 has become virtually stateless, and Hitler rises to power. England is kind of in, England and France and Spain, the Scandinavian nations. Everybody's kind of in. Almost everybody's in a in some sort of version of the reformed anarchy republic. How should people respond to Hitler's invasion of Poland?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're in Poland and Hitler, or anybody, of course, it doesn't have to be a boogeyman, but someone's coming onto your property, then acting in defense is, a proportional defense against the aggressors is definitely legitimate. Now, it might be a lost cause, practically speaking. In any scenario, you might in prudential judgment think, hey, this is we're not going to outlast them. Of course, there were also sort of like the ghetto resistance. The few Jewish ghettos that hadn't given up their firearms were able to fight off the Nazis for days or weeks on end, and that was certainly worth the effort. You were fighting for your life. But yeah, so that would be someone's invading your property. That's definitely
Right.
a just
Well,
defense.
we all get that. I think I don't think any libertarian under the big, libertarian tent would say that you're wrong for grabbing your rifle in the 1940s and driving Nazis out of your home. But what do you do if Nazis are knocking on the doorstep of, the guy at the entrance of the neighborhood? That's the big hang up here, practically speaking, is at what point do I get to step off my property and run to the mouth of my neighborhood with my neighbors and, drive them off of my neighbor Jim's front yard? I mean, because it's not like there's a handful of Nazis walking in the door. It's an armed force. It's a detachment of an armed force, and they're making it pretty clear with their nonverbal actions what they're all about.
Right, I see.
That's the difficulty here, I think.
Yeah, it's not just individuals acting in self-defense, but you can act on behalf of others, and people can organize together, and you can have an organization act on your behalf, being consensual, of course, and following the same criteria. That's how it would be done, right? So before, when the founding fathers, for example, wrote in, or in other places too, wrote about the dangers of a standing army, they didn't have in mind that the new country, as it were, was going to be defenseless. They were like thinking that they just didn't want it to be, this to be organized in terms of having a standing army. So there's plenty of work done on how defense can be organized apart from a state as well, and what would incentivize people to do that and how that can operate, so that roving bands of I don't know, Vikings or something wouldn't be the problem that most people imagine. When we remember that all the worst things, all the worst atrocities in the history of the world have not been perpetrated by private criminals, but by states, by monopoly states, we should feel reassured, not frightened.
Right. Could you do anything as a Christian under this understanding of warfare ethics to go abroad, to leave your home, leave your neighborhood, and participate in the voluntary defense of another people?
Yes, that's all. That as you explain it, that would all be certainly legitimate. As legitimate as any act of defense on someone else's behalf. Someone being attacked in the street and so on. But obviously, you'd want to count the cost, or you'd want to see if the resources to be used couldn't be used more effectively in some other way to help those people, whoever was in danger or being victimized or whatever. So in other words, if you can use X number of resources to defend someone coercively, but you could use half those resources to just get that person away, that's probably what you ought to do. So anyway, that needs to be considered, I think.
This section is not saying that Christians do not have a right to participate in a massive joint effort to defend life, liberty, and the pursuit of property.
That's right.
It's saying that there's the way that things are currently formulated in society are inherently unjust. And I mean, since the whole premise is that the state, capital S state in general, is immoral, participation really in anything that they're doing abroad is going to be immoral, particularly if it's that leads to the taking of civilian lives and of non-combatants' lives and etc.
That's right. If anybody supposes that this subsection is some kind of I don't know, excuse or serving as some kind of motivation to be inhumane to people who are in the military or Christians who are in the military, I would want to urge it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
Right. This is a call to for urgent persuasion of those who are involved in these things to get out.
Yeah. Yep. That's right.